thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Rick Green here with David Barton. And David, this is one of those shows, man. You and I both get very excited about getting the opportunity to interview World War II veterans and hear some of these amazing stories. We got a really good one today.
Every, 3 or 4 weeks, we kind of have a vet on and try to tell the story. And it's good to remember what these guys did. We got a really good one today, and we do love these stories. I'm telling you, man, these are inspirational. Every time we hear them, and this is a really unique story, Rick. The U.S.S.Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And the guys who have survived that particular ship in World War II, there's only a handful left. And for whatever reason, we've been blessed to have these guys involved in them. So let me just kind of set up the story real quick. Right at the end of World War II, the U.S.S.Indianapolis was delivering the parts for the first atomic bomb. It was going to be used to end the Japanese side, because we've already done the German side, the European side. Now let's end the Japanese side. And so on the 30th of July, last day of July, almost 1 day short, as they were coming back from having dropped off the parts for the atomic bomb, the USS-Indianapolis was hit by a torpedo from a Japanese submarine, and in only 12 minutes it went under. Now, there were right at 1,200 crewmen on board, and about 300 of them went down with the ship, couldn't get off the ship. There were 900 who made it into the water. And out of the 900, just a little over 300 survived, 317, and the ship went down so fast the Navy did not know it was that it sunk. The Navy didn't know about it at all. And a PV-1 Ventura was on a routine patrol, and they saw these guys floating out there, and it was days later, and that's when they sent in the relief and supplies. So this is one of those vets who was on Indianapolis, who is one of the very few who actually survived, that was seen by the PV-1, and they went in to get him out. So this is going to be an incredible story. This is a great one.
And that's such a key part to the story, is that it was 4.5 days later, when they were finally rescued, and so about 600 of those guys lost their lives in that 4.5 days. The gentleman that's going to be with us was one of the few survivors, one of the few still alive today, Edgar Harrell. Great book that he and his son have just come out with called Out of the Depths, an unforgettable World War II story of survival, courage, and the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. It is an absolutely amazing story, and we're thrilled to have him with us. Stay with us. You don't want to miss this on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the case Lee versus Wiseman, the Supreme Court ruled that for an adult to mention the word God at a public graduation constituted both psychological and religious coercion against the students. Yet consider the actions of William Samuel Johnson, a signer of the Constitution and one of America's leading educators who served as the first president of Columbia College. At his graduation exercises, William Samuel Johnson declared to the students, "You this day have received a public education, the purpose whereof hath been to qualify you better to serve your Creator and your country. Your first great duties, you are sensible, are those you owe to heaven, to your Creator and Redeemer." Founding Father William Samuel Johnson believed that a public graduation was an appropriate setting to remind students of the duties which they owed God.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us today. We are thrilled to have a very special guest today. He's the author of Out of the Depths, an unforgettable World War II story of survival, courage, and the sinking of the U.S.S. Indianapolis. We have been blessed to have a couple of guests over the years talk about this tragedy and what happened there, but to have Edgar Harrell with us, that actually survived this tragedy is just a privilege. Sir, it is great to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Well, it's a delight to be with you, sir.
So the book just came out. I'm just curious. I mean, this had to be, on some levels, difficult for you to go back and relive the greatest loss of life in our single incident in our Navy's history. And for you to be one of those few survivors, to go back and relive this and put it into a book had to be difficult. What was the purpose for you of sharing this story with your fellow Americans?
Well, basically, the story needs to be told. Number one, how did World War II end? And what were the things that were taking place those last several days? And it's not in the history books, and sad to say, it's not in some of the World War II museums and so on, too. So I take issue with them, and thus we have written the second book. We wrote the one in 2005, and it's been out now for since that time. But now we have a publisher that says that this should be in every Christian bookstore in America. And we had 5 bidders that bid to republish it, and it's on the market today. And thus, I'm on the road telling the story, together with speaking all over the country. I've been in some 30 states. I speak some 30 times or more each year. So it's my honor to relive what we as survivors of the 317 that survived. There's 36 of us still living. Of the 9 Marines that survived, there's only 2 of us still living.
Now that's out of, so there were 1,196 crew on board, and you guys, there were about 900 of you initially that survived the sinking. But only 3. You said 316. Was that the total?
Yes, actually, of the 1196 aboard, we surmised that maybe 900 of us actually got off the ship and got in the water, which means that about 300 didn't even get off the ship. But a long story about the fact that the Navy lost us, and it wasn't until 4.5 days later, after swimming with the sharks in 110-degree heat, no water, no food. Providentially, we were spotted, and only 317 were still alive to be rescued. That's basically the story in a nutshell.
So almost 600 that we lost due to exposure and dehydration, shark attacks.
That's right.
I can't even imagine what you went through for those 4 days. Were most of you guys that were ultimately rescued, were y'all still together or somehow close together, or had y'all drifted apart?
Oh, I understand that they say that maybe we were scattered over several miles, 15, 20 more miles. In fact, debris even further than that. But just to give you a little perspective, when I left the ship, I joined naturally anyone that was out there and watched the ship go down, and then we took inventory of our group. We could basically surmise that there were about 80 of us. Some were injured. Some had been flash burned considerable. Some did not have life jackets. And just to get ahead of the story now, to say that by the 3rd day at noon, there's only 17 of us. And even get further down the road, down to when I was actually picked up, I was with a Navy lieutenant when the plane actually spotted us and radioed for a plane that could land in the water to come from Palau. And an hour and a half later and 150 miles later, PBY showed up. And I later then was rescued by the PBY.
What kind of physical condition were you in at that point once you were rescued?
Bad shape, all of us. You can imagine dehydration, mass hallucination, and seeing maybe your buddy close by be disemboweled or a bottom torso gone, and then that body is going to be with you in that 100-degree weather, and it's going to be, you can just only imagine what's taking place with that body. And finally, some of the flesh is actually sloshing from the water off of him, and maybe he comes off of a high swell or something and bumps down into you and leaves part of the residue of the body on you, and that's going to stay with you too.
How did you? Well, actually, before I ask you how you over the years how you dealt with all that, let me just at the time for over those 4.5 days, were there moments when you how did you come to terms with believing at that point whether or not you would survive? I mean, did you at any point say, Lord, I'm coming home, or I mean, what was it like for you in terms of dealing with I'm probably not going to be rescued?
Well, let me just take you to the moment that I'm about to abandon ship. I held on to that rail, and I often say there's times when you pray, and there's times when you pray, and there is a difference. And I poured my heart out to the Lord, whom I knew, and I tell him, I don't want to die. I want to live. I want to live for you. I have a mom and dad back home, an older sister, younger sister, 6 younger brothers, and a certain brunette that said that she would wait for me. And I get ahead of the story and say she waited. We were married in 1947, and this coming July the 25th will be 67 years. Now, I knew that the Lord was speaking to me as I'm about to abandon ship. And as I prayed, he brought scripture to mind. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. Well, I'm scared to death. But I had assurance. I felt that when I left the ship that I'm going to survive. But I certainly didn't realize that I'm going to be out there 4.5 days. And each day there were things that was happening that I wondered, is it possible? Is it possible that we can make it even this day or this night? And then something like a miracle happens every day. And that gave me assurance that the Lord at least was faithful to what I felt was basically the promise when he was saying to me through his word, I'll never leave you nor forsake you, and so on. But there were times when I saw buddies that were willing to, and I often say, it's much easier to die than it is to live. And I experienced that, and yet in God's providence, I made it those 4.5 days because of his mercy and his grace only.
Well, it's obvious even from the way you describe it that your faith was absolutely essential to not only your physical survival but your mental well-being, and it sounds like that is a big part of how you have survived even after. And by the way, I guess you were, 20 years old, 19, 20? How old were you when this happened?
Well, I was 19, would have been 20 in October of that year, yes.
Okay, so 19 years old. This kind of an experience, how important was faith for you to overcome it after you survived and be able to even function and to go on to have such a fruitful life? This, as you mentioned, this brunette and the family that you've been able to produce over the years. Your son's a big part of the book. I mean, how important was faith to that part?
Well, faith has been important all through my life, and, I don't know what all I promised the Lord. Honestly, I was desperate because I was looking out into eternity, and I was pleading for mercy and grace, and then each day, like the second day when a little rain cloud went over and you were so desperate for water. You'd seen boys drinking some of the salt water, and salt water on a dehydrated body, within the hour, you become deranged to the point that your buddy might be your enemy. And we saw things like that. Well, okay, now, maybe more to your question, how does that affect me through life? Well, through life, it was the same Lord that that brought me through that ordeal, that I have tried to live for him and trust him to guide my paths down through life. And to a great, great degree, that has been my life these 89 years, but say 75 years ago when I went into the Marine Corps.
Mm. So now let me ask you, in terms of your son being involved with the book, one of the things that we try to do here on WallBuilders Live is capture the stories of men like you from the World War II generation and other veterans as well, so that future generations will appreciate the freedom they have and what has been sacrificed to preserve that. Is that what your son's desire was in helping you to tell the story?
Well, after 9/11, my son says, "Dad, we've got to write your story." Now, I might say that I did not talk my story up until that time. Not that I never mentioned it, but no one really knew what had happened, and my son just only had tidbits. But after 9/11, he said, "We've got to write your story." And I said, "Well, David, you're a good writer, and yes, I think we need to tell the story, because I was seeing what is happening to that generation back of World War II. So we began to put the book together, and basically my son said, we're going to just talk about a chapter at a time. And so he kind of outlined the book, and we started, and both of us on a computer separately, and he would maybe write what he thought was taking place and maybe certain incidents and so on. And I could say, no, it wasn't like that. Here's really how it happened and what happened and so on. Well, so he pulled from me my innermost thoughts and feelings.
That's awesome. Well, we certainly want to encourage people to get the book. It's called Out of the Depths, an unforgettable World War II story of survival, courage, and the sinking of the U.S.S.Indianapolis. Edgar Harrell with his son, David Harrell, writing the book. Mr. Harrell, if I could ask you, what is it, for you when you think about young people today that are, I'm thinking of my own sons that want to serve in some way in the military. What advice do you give to young people that are thinking about joining?
Okay, I speak all over the country, and I speak to many, many, many young people, and I see a nice young man, 15, 16 years old. I kid him. I say, "You make a good Marine," and then maybe the dads are with them, because I speak oftentimes from father, son, family, and so he will maybe ask me, what advice would I give? And I basically say this: young man, I would advise you this. If you are in school and you are making your grades, I would say you stay in school. But if you have trouble out of school and you desire to get in the Marine Corps or get in the service, then yes, get into service. And after a period of time, if you then get out, then get you an education, because without an education, you aren't going to get very far in life. But I would encourage you to stay in school as long as you can make the grades and stay in there. But if you insist on getting in the service, then keep your nose clean and learn a trade in the service. And then after maybe 20 years now, you can get out and still get you an education, and you will have had a good education in those 20 years in any branch of the service.
I understand that recently you had a chance to meet the great-granddaughter of Commander Hashimoto, who actually ordered the strike on your ship. I can't imagine what that was like. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was a great experience. I'll back up just a bit and say Commander Hashimoto lost all of his blood relatives at Hiroshima, and he remarried, and then later he had a granddaughter, and that granddaughter, I think, married a Korean, and they were in the States in school. They came to one of our reunions, and from there, that was maybe 6 or 8 years ago, and they came back again and again. Well, we got acquainted with them, we welcomed them, and then this past year at our reunion, I had spoken and had given my story to, 350, 400 people, and Hoshimoto's granddaughter and great-granddaughter were there. And afterwards, everyone were coming in the front of me to greet me and thank me and so on. Well, here's the little great-granddaughter, some 6 years old. She stood in front of me, and the granddad that I am, I just held out my arms and beckoned her to come, and she came right to me, and I picked her up and set her on my knee, and I have the picture of that in my book. And then the mother came up behind her, and I stood up for her, and we embraced, and tears streaming down our cheeks, and I turned to her and kissed her on the cheek and told her that I loved her, and I could trust and pray that we could be friends in the days ahead. Well, needless to say, we are friends, and we will be friends. We contact each other periodically, even today.
Wow, that's powerful. Last question I have for you, sir. What does Memorial Day mean for you personally?
Well, it means less today, maybe than it did 20 years ago or 50 years ago, because I see the way that our country is going today, and the disrespect that we have for the servicemen that are giving their all today. And as I walk into a grocery store and they see U.S.S.Indianapolis on my shirt, and I see a serviceman, I immediately give him a thumbs up, and maybe he sees U.S.S.Indianapolis, and we will share, and I'll wish him the Godspeed and let him know that here's one World War II Marine that is 100% behind him, and pray for his well-being and his safety and so on.
Well, Mr. Harrell, we so appreciate your story, so appreciate your time and your son in doing the book, your time and sharing today with us. And if folks would like to have you come speak, how can they reach you and put in a request to get you to come speak? www.indsurvivor.com, INDY survivor.com. All right, indiesurvivor.com. We're going to make a link right there on WallBuilders Live today. You've been such a blessing to us. We appreciate your service and your sacrifice. We get to enjoy our freedom, even speaking freely on this program, because of men like you, and we want our young people and our next generation to hear that story, but our generation as well, because it has been lost, and there's a lack of appreciation out there, and we just want to share your story so people will realize why we have what we have and what it takes to get there. So thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing. And thanks for continuing to live an extraordinary life.
Well, thank you so kindly. Thank you so kindly, sir.
We'll be right back with David Barton.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on WallBuilders Live. I bet you're glad you stayed with us on WallBuilders Live today and got to hear Edgar Harrell. Wow, David, what a story.
That's a story. And by the way, tomorrow we have part 2 of this, except we didn't know that when we scheduled this. As it turns out, the guy tomorrow was the guy a medic who treated these guys they brought in from Indianapolis. And so here you got Edgar coming in, and it turns out tomorrow we've got the medic who treated him. And we didn't know that when we booked these 2 interviews. So that's going to be really fun. But
and really cool that the kids helped the dads write the stories in both of these stories.
Cases.
Edgar's son helped him, and tomorrow we'll be having a guy named William Luke, and his daughter helped him. I just love the fact that they're getting the stories from this World War II generation.
Well, I tell you what, you made a comment in this thing that says, I can't even imagine what you went through over those days. And just what Edgar said, he says, well, it started with 80 in his group. 3 days later, there's only 17 in his group. At the time that PV1 saw them, there were 2, and when they got back an hour and a half later, he's the only one they picked up. Just imagine going through that. That is, man, that's an unbelievable change. But you can tell his attitude, and his faith brought him through it really strong. But I loved what he said at the beginning. He said, this is not in the history books, and it should be. And I would think that's exactly right. Wouldn't you want to know what caused wars to end? And he's talking about generally what they were doing and what led to the end of World War II. I mean, why wouldn't we cover that? Don't you want to end all future wars? Don't you want to know how wars should end? And he's right. We don't cover that. We don't cover the biographical history. We don't cover the stories of these guys who sacrificed so much. And that really makes you proud of your country and of these kind of guys. And we do need to cover that. But, man, we are so appreciative for him being on today.
It's the story of one man's courage, ingenuity, and his faith in God's providence in the midst of the worst naval disaster in U.S. history. You got to check it out, friends. Out of the Depths is the name of the book. Edgar Harrell, thank you so much for your service and for your time coming on today. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand under